Good evening to everybody. Welcome to Congregation KINS's Wednesday evening shiur on the Parsha. This week, of course, is special. Every week is special, but the added special nature this week is it is Shabbat Mevarchim, which means that we have really passed through the difficult days of the 3 weeks, and of course, Tisha B'Av. And now we enter into a new phase of the Jewish year, and that is, of course, the month of Elul, which we will usher in Be'ezrat Hashem next week. And we will announce that coming this coming Shabbat. Parshat Re'eh. Moshe Rabbeinu, as we've mentioned the past few weeks, Parshat Re'eh is not just Parshat Re'eh, but Sefer Devarim prepares the Jewish people to enter the land of Eretz Yisrael. Most of it takes place on the very last month of Moshe Rabbeinu's life. And in it, of course, he charges the Jewish people to live up to their calling. And it is a great national calling. As Rav Hirsch mentions, not here, but in another place, the Jewish people is fundamentally different. The Jewish nation is fundamentally different from all other nations. All other nations have one primary goal, and that is to survive, and that is to thrive, as the nation itself is, whether it is these wonderful United States of America, with all of our flaws, but we certainly have much good that we've contributed to the world. And of course, it could be France, it could be any country on earth, Mexico. But the Jewish people's nationhood is rooted in the idea that we have a divine mission, and that is to spread the concept of Torah throughout the world. And of course, our divine mission is that of following the mitzvot that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us, both as individuals and as a nation. So, for example, in Kriyat Shema, as we had in Parshat Va'et Hanan, we had the first parsha in Va'et Hanan of Kriyat Shema is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That's Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim, that it also speaks to us as individuals. And then the mitzvot are given, Ukshartam La'ot Al Yadecha, in your hands, and you shall Vishinantam Livanecha, to your sons or to your children. We have the various mitzvot that are in that first paragraph. But then in Parshat Eikev, which we read last week, we move from the individual to the nation. The nation itself is responsible for acting in consort, in service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore it's for all of the people. Now, by the way, the big mistake that the Tzedukim made, the Tzedukim were those who misinterpreted the Torah, the written Torah. Now, by the way, they are not to be confused with the Reform movement. The Reform movement rejects the idea of Torah Sinai. It rejects the idea that the Jewish people was given its mission on Har Sinai, both as individuals and as a nation. But the Tzdukim did not do that. The Tzdukim, they said, if anything, the Tzdukim said the mission is to the nation, not necessarily to individuals. So that when in the second parsha of Kriyat Shema that we read in Parshat Eikev is written in the plural, and therefore the Tzdukim actually rejected the idea of reward and punishment on an individual level, but they accepted it. The Tzdukim accepted it on a national level. And what is, of course, the national this national symbol, Yerushalayim. And what is the national symbol of Yerushalayim? The Beit HaMikdash. And so the Stukim, in their own perverted way, understood the Torah as a document that primarily dealt with the nation as a whole. That when rain comes, when the people do wrong, then the nation is punished as a nation, and we worship as a nation. Individual worship was downplayed by the Stukim. Now, today we're going to talk with Parshat Rabbi. We're dealing with a very powerful series of mitzvot. I think there's something like 17 or 18 mitzvot that we have, mitzvot aseh and mitzvot lo taseh. We're going to focus on one of them today, and that mitzvah primarily is the mitzvah of Maaser Sheni. The mitzvah is that, let's say, if a person is living in the Shvela, they're zocha to live in Eretz Yisrael near the sea coast, and they have, for example, produce, and they're raising animals, especially if it's in the north, right? All of those, what the Jew has, we have the mitzvah aser ka'aser. We have a mitzvah of giving 1/10 of the produce of our land to the Beis HaMikdash, to Yerushalayim, and eating it in Yerushalayim, as the Meforshim say, 4 times within the Shemitah cycle. The first year of the cycle, the second year of the cycle, the fourth year, and the first year and the second year, and then the fourth and fifth year. Those are the years that we have a special mitzvah to bring our produce and our animals to Yerushalayim to be eaten in Yerushalayim. The third and sixth year, those are reserved for what we call Maaser Ani, to make sure that the poor people are taken care of, not just in those years, but especially, of course, grain and other products that can be maintained over the course of time. That was the mitzvah of Maaser Ani, to give 1/10 of the produce of that year to the poor people. But years 1 and 2 and 4 and 5 are mitzvot. We have the mitzvah of Maaser Sheni. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about the rationales for Maaser Sheni. The mitzvah itself is to, as we said, to eat, to bring the food or the money, one of the two. In other words, you can exchange the money, and we have a Masechta that deals with that as well. The Masechet Maaser Sheni. It's in Mishnayot, and then the Torah talks about in detail. There, the Mishnah talks in detail about how we can transfer the kedusha of the grain or of the animal onto money, and then bring the money to Yerushalayim and spend it there, because it'd be very difficult for everybody to bring all the grain to Yerushalayim and eat it. Now, we are going to see, of course, and unfortunately, so wait a minute, you have even if you give 1/10 of your produce, and if everybody does that, so they won't be able to eat all of that within the course of 7 days, let's say, on Sukkot, or even in Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret. They won't be able to do all of that. And then what are they going to do? So the answer is that it is, the money can be brought, and we're going to see another way, very important ways, in which we can fulfill the beautiful mitzvah of Maaser Sheni. Now, actually, it's the Netziv who points out, he's not the only one, but he's one of the people that points out, you're not going to be able to eat all of that within 7 days. And therefore, the Netziv and others state that what we really need to do is to share what we have. It's not that I have to eat it in Yerushalayim. The people that I wish to benefit are the ones along with me. My family may come, others, So that food is eaten in Yerushalayim. Now, it's interesting that in general, Rabbi Yitzchak Arama, the Akedat Yitzchak, mentions that we see that the mitzvot now are getting progressively more difficult, psychologically more difficult, and therefore when we have a psychological difficulty, we resist. So Rabbi Yitzchak Arama, the Akedat Yitzchak, mentions that that we give money, giving money to the poor is one thing. As a matter of fact, it's even something which people are used to doing. Probably other cultures. I believe Islam has a form of it. I believe they do, and it's to their credit. That's fine. Christianity has also a form of it, but what neither of them has is the issue of Shemitah. The issue of Shemitah is increasingly more difficult, not only because I'm giving up a part of my money, but actually I'm giving up all my produce. I have to be mafter it. All of my produce that I have, I'm mafter on, let's say, on the 7th year. We're not talking about Ma'aser Sheni right now, but Rabbi Yitzchak Rama says we can see that the Torah is working progressively at getting to understand that this world is not yours. Another example, says Rabbi Yitzchak Rama, is the idea is canceling a debt. I loaned you money. I worked for 6 years. You borrowed money, pay it back. And yet, not only person is not even obligated to pay it back. Now, the Gemara talks about very clearly about people who can pay the debt back and don't, and deliberately maneuver themselves so as not to have to pay the debt. So it's not so simple. But the idea in a person's mind is, I lent you money in good faith. I want it back. It's my money. And one of the things the Torah is working on having us begin to remove from our mindset, that is the idea that it's my money. When, again, I mention this often, but I think it's very important. When either the Meshulach or the poor person, now remember, Meshulachim are not necessarily poor people. Meshulachim, this is from the time of the Gaonim, the yeshivot would send out people on behalf of the yeshiva to collect from the yeshiva. So if the yeshiva was in Pumbedita, it was in Sura, or it was in Bavel, they would send the people out, representatives, to collect money all over. In North Africa, they collect money, and in Europe, they collected money. And those were mishulachim, from the word lishalech or lishalach, to send out. They were indeed missionaries, so to speak, in the positive sense, and they would collect money on behalf of the yeshivot. But then we can't confuse those with the people who are very poor. The Torah talks very carefully about poor people in this week's Parshat. Okay, that you may not close your hand against the poor person. And by the way, it is, I don't know whether it's easier or not. That's a subjective thing, but I wonder if we took some sort of a poll to find out which is psychologically more difficult. Okay, to give you got $100, give $100 to a yeshiva, or to a hospital, or to some place which benefits all groups of people, an organization, or to a poor person. And we find, of course, it's a very alluring thing to do, to give large amounts of money to institutions, Torah institutions, chesed institutions. Very good, absolutely. But we have to remember that on the other hand, there are people less, I think, probably percentage-wise less now than there used to be, because most, in the world in which we live, most professions are not proscribed from us. In Europe, there was a Judengasse. There was a Jewish street. That's where you sold, not just where you lived. That's where you sold. You couldn't go on to where the Christians were. Jews could not own necessarily their own land in Europe. And so therefore, it was quite difficult when people would come. So the idea of, do I give money to the poor? Do I give money to an institution which helps the poor or helps in Torah learning? Those things are very difficult for us to distinguish between. But what's important is that we realize, and it doesn't matter whether it's the Akedat Yitzchak or the various other Meforshim, it's not my money. That's what I have to understand. Not my money. Hashem gave me a certain amount of money to enjoy the world in which I live. From that, I have an obligation to apportion 10%, aser to aser, for worthy causes, either for individuals or for others. But again, we are, as the Alshich says, we need to uproot ourselves from the concept of kochi v'otzem yadi. We have to uproot ourselves from this idea that I did it, it's mine. Well, it's only mine in a theoretical sense. L'Hashem ha'aratzum lo'ah. The world is God's. We have a limited ownership over land, and over not just land, over property, and we have to use it properly and well. Okay. Now, let's take a look and see. Oh, by the way, Abravanel says to us, and I want to mention this too, that this idea of giving away things, early people, again, not necessarily Jewish, but in general, people were used to the idea of serving God through faith, especially Christianity. Paul really spread that along the world, that he actually took a pasuk from Treyaser, Tzadik be'emunato yichyeh, that the righteous person lives through his faith. And Paul said, from his faith alone. And therein, he did us actually a very big favor. He actually did us a very big favor because he distinguished us from those who call themselves Christians. That in fact, the way to reach God is not through faith alone. Of course, emunah is very important. Tzadik be'emunato yichyeh, but it doesn't mean that you don't do mitzvot. And you can see how many mitzvot, hundreds of mitzvot, are given or are clarified in Sefer Dvarim. So many of them. For example, when we get to Parshat Kitei, say 74 mitzvot. More than 70 mitzvot are either introduced or refined in that parsha. So we're talking about serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu not just with faith, but as we see here in this parsha of Re'eh, that we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with our property, not just by but not just by utterances, which are important but insufficient. I guess we could say tefillah and general statements are necessary but insufficient conditions for serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Necessary, absolutely, but they are insufficient. We must learn to part with, quote, our money, because it's not our money. It's the money that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us to use properly. Okay, now, I want to start with the Sefer HaChinuch as we embark upon a better understanding of Maaser Sheni, and through it, by the way, other mitzvot as well. First of all, the Sefer HaChinuch tells us that, in explaining this mitzvah of aser to aser, mitzvah of Maaser Sheni, he says, if you want to know the rationale for it, he said, I already gave you the rationale way back in Parshat Bechukotai. So it's not this, the mitzvah itself, of course, existed in a certain form. The concept certainly existed back when the Torah was given on Parshat Bechukotai. And here we're going to see what the Sefer Chinuch says on on the mitzvah of Maser Behema Tahora all year round, and we will see that he says the exact same rationale applies to the mitzvah of Maser Shem. Mishorshei mitzvah, as he says often, the rationale for the mitzvah, the root, but we would say the rationale. Sha'akel Baruch Hu bachar ba'am Yisrael the chafetz l'man sidko. And God chose the Jewish people, and He desired, because of His complete righteousness, liot kulam oskei torato. Our job in this world is, in one form or another, to learn Torah. Okay? To learn Torah, to teach Torah, to disseminate Torah. That is what our job is. And we know that, of course, that's very good. That's important. But he says, Yodea Elokim Sherov Bnei Adam Nimshachim Achar HaChomer HaPachot. He calls it HaChomer HaPachot. He says most people are drawn to material things. It's probably true. We are drawn to material things. The Shagamu Basar, because in the end he says, we're Basar Vadam. We're blood, flesh and blood, and we are drawn to materialism. And he says, now we have a problem. The Torah chose us to learn Torah, to disseminate Torah, to be engaged in the Torah all of our lives as Ovdei Hashem, those who serve Hashem. But at the same time, it doesn't mean we're built that way. We're not. We have to really work to do it, and we know that, of course, probably each of us knows. I know that I'm given sometimes to things that aren't necessarily directly drawn to Torah. They're not necessarily an avera, but they're not necessarily the propagation of Torah principles. So he says, Hashem knows, Shelo yidu nafsham ba'amal Torah u'oska tamid. The key here is always, we are not constantly engaged in the study or the promulgation of Torah. And therefore, we don't work at it. And therefore, he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to devise in the 613 beautiful mitzvot that he gave us, he devised a means, tricky, he devised a means by which we will be enhancing our Torah learning. And of course, I need to tell you that it works, all right, because we are the Am HaSefer. There can be no doubt about it that the Jewish people's dedication to Torah is tremendous, and our greatest Torah authorities confirm that Torah is learned now all over the world. Every shul has a daf yomi, not every, but every city has a daf yomi, and every shul has learning sessions over and over again. This is a learning session, so much. And by the way, the fact that we have Zoom, Baruch Hashem, Hodu Lashem Kitov, because now we have one more way in order to disseminate Torah. Now, he says, so therefore, and he says the second principle, says the Sefer Shmuel, Ki kol adam nimshach likboa dirato b'makom shemamono sham. People like to be close to their money. Reality. Okay. That's and when we're not close to our money, that's why God invented safety deposit boxes. Okay, so that we can always be in some way, shape, or form near our money. If not physical proximity, near enough. Have it accessible to us. That's the way we are. Okay. And so then, now he says, having given these two principles, we were created for the study and dissemination of Torah and propagation of Torah. But on the other hand, we have a difficulty because that's the second principle now is we have a difficulty because we are drawn after materialism. And the third principle is that we like to be near. It gives a sense of security to be near our money. So now he says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the mitzvah of Maser Shem. 4 years out of the 7-year cycle, we are to bring our money to Yerushalayim and bring our wealth to Yerushalayim, either directly or through an exchange of the kedusha in money. Okay, and why? Because Hashem wanted us to come the makom she'esek hachochma va'torah sham, that the whole engagement, the enterprise, good word I think for this, esek haTorah is the enterprise of Torah, Yerushalayim, is in Yerushalayim itself. Shesham HaSanhedrin Yodei Da'as Mevinei Hidea. You go there, and anybody who's been to Yerushalayim, even in our days, even without the Beis HaMikdash, it is everywhere around. Chochma, I mean, unfortunately, we also find stupidity a lot too, but the truth is we have a great deal of chochma, tremendous amount. It is a city within a country that has a sense of destiny, a sense of purpose, a sense of mission. And as the verse said, our mission is the Torah. Now, so the Sefer HaChinuch tells us, a person, why do we have this mitzvah? Watch it, how beautifully he says this. We know that Maser Sheni, our mitzvah, is to be eaten in Yerushalayim. You're not supposed to eat it outside of Yerushalayim. So, I mean, you could eat it outside of Yerushalayim, provided you transferred the kedusha from the produce to the money. Also of the 4th year. In other words, God is giving us a number of reasons for us to go to Yerushalayim. I'll call upon him. Or the person in Torah, or a person is capable of going and learning for a year. Oh, I just heard that one of the Roshei Kolel, they should live and be well, is coming back from his Shnat Shabbaton in Yerushalayim. He didn't go to Paris, nice intellectual city. St. Petersburg, no. A year in Yerushalayim. Oh, Yishlach l'sham echad mibanav. Listen to what he says. Either he goes, or he sends one of his children, his family, sheyilmod sham, that they should learn there. And of course, if they're there, then of course, if you have produce that lasts throughout the year, that he would eat that produce there. Says the Sefer HaChinuch, will be in every house. Nikol Yisrael ish chacham yodei Torah. At least one person in every family. What a concept! What a concept! That there should be a person in every family who is in Yerushalayim, if it's at all possible. Asher yelamed b'chochmato kol beit avi. Then when he comes back, or she, it happens over and over and over again, comes back, they teach Torah to the family. They bring the Torah to the house in Haifa, to the house in Tel Aviv, to the house wherever it may be, Beit Shemesh. He says, and that way, the knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu through the Torah is disseminated throughout the Jewish people. And so therefore he says that therefore one of the main functions of this is they come into contact. Each family comes into contact with the Gedolei Ador, with people, thinking people. I remember standing at a bus stop, all right? Standing at a bus stop in Yerushalayim, and it didn't happen just once, but this is so clear to me. I happened to be with my great teacher, Nechama Leibovitz. We were both waiting for a bus. Me and Nechama were waiting for a bus. And then we're talking, and up steps one of the Rosh Yeshiva in Yerushalayim, right? Same bus stop, different bus, all right? Same bus stop. And so whether we talked about Torah or we talked about things of content and value in life rather than the trivia of life, that is certain. That happens in Yerushalayim 1,000 times a day, 5,000 times a day. So not only in the walls of the yeshiva. Now I want to conclude with a story This was during the Second Lebanon War, 2005. I had the great zechut of being in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, in 2005. It's just about every year. And I also had the zechut, and I, even until this year too, the zechut of taking my grandchildren on a tour of Yerushalayim, things that their school may not take them to, and that's understandable. Not because there's anything wrong, it's just the school has its agenda. There's only so much you can teach. So the children ask me to take them on a tour. So I take them on a tour to Yerushalayim, and I think Bonnie was there and others were there. And I'm explaining, and we're standing in the Ir Atikah, in what was the Rova HaYehudi, in the Jewish quarter. And I'm explaining things from the time of Herod, I don't even remember exactly what it was I was talking about. And I see a woman come sort of sliding from her group, coming over to listen. That's fine. And then when we finished that particular segment, she came up to me. Now, she was probably in her late 30s, maybe. And she said to me, I didn't know all of this about Yerushalayim. Well, I said, okay, wonderful. Now you do. Where do you live? She said, Haifa. Oh, good, Haifa. And then I said, how often do you get to Yerushalayim? And she said, I have never been to Yerushalayim. Haifa. Not an observant person, right? Again, certainly this is not an indictment of her life, but she never got to Yerushalayim. She lived in Haifa, so Haifa is a good 4 hours away, 3-4 hours away. And she said, I didn't realize all of this was here. How HaKadosh Baruch Hu contrived in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, and it even extends until our days now, that Yerushalayim becomes the magnet of the Jewish people. I've mentioned many times that it's the nature of people to live within cities. Yerushalayim is a city that lives within a people. And so wherever we are, at the furthest points of our dispersion, Yerushalayim was always on our mind. And either we did it actually or we did it theoretically. But we got to Yerushalayim, one form or another. Sometimes, sadly, for most people, it was purely in theory, purely by Daf Gimel or Dalet or Mem Dalet, when in the Gemara when it's discussed, or learning this Parsha of Rabbi and others, the idea of Hamakom Asher Yivchar Hashem, the place that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has chosen. And so we formed a temporary bond. Remember, bonds are not necessarily always enduring, but a residue of that bond stays, because I'm talking to you about that interaction. And hopefully she was somewhat inspired by Yerushalayim. And I asked her, why did you come to Yerushalayim? She said, because of the rockets. The rockets were hitting Haifa or close to Haifa, and therefore she and her family came down to neighbors, friends, or relatives in Yerushalayim. So the enemies of the Jewish people, the enemies of all which is good in the world, actually drove her to come to Yerushalayim. She was Olah, even though it wasn't Olah L'Regel, she was Olah. And therefore, her very experience was elevated. So I hope that stays with her. I know the story stays with me. And Emir Hashem, remember this week again, this is Parshat, this week is Shabbat Varchim. And when we, Bezrat Hashem, when we usher in the month of Elul, may it be an inspiration for us to continue our learning and our growth. Good Shabbos to everybody.
Thank you. Good job. Thank you.
You're welcome.